Thanks for joining our webinar today. My name is Adria Wheaton. My co-host is Candace Shively, and we are both with Utah State University Extension's Center for Water Efficient Landscaping. I want to thank eXtension for their support of this webinar, and thanks to Mark Locklear for helping us out with these webinars. Our format's going to be changing in January, so we really appreciate all of Mark's help in getting these webinars up and going. Just wanted to briefly mention the CEU links if you're looking for CEUs. I will add those to the chat box as we go along. But let me just introduce this month's webinar. And we've got David Rice. He's the Conservation Program Coordinator at Weber Basin Water Conservancy District. That's here in northern Utah. David's been working in the water industry in water conservation since 2002. He received his bachelor's degree from Weber State University in biology and secondary education, after which he taught high school for several years in biology and general science. He then came back to USU and got his master's degree in horticulture with an emphasis on water conservation. And he currently works for Weber Basin as their conservation programs coordinator. And that means he manages conservation programs throughout Davis, Weber, Morgan, Summit counties, including the management of a 2-acre learning garden. And if you haven't checked that out and you're in northern Utah, it's pretty impressive. And he works on educating the public about water efficiency in the landscape. So with that, I will turn it over to David.
Thank you, Adria, for the introduction. So really, we'll just get going into this because the time is short, but I wanted to give, for those that are maybe not familiar with Weber Basin Water Conservancy District, I wanted to go just a real brief overview of the district and what we do, as far as just give a perspective of why secondary metering is kind of a thing. It's kind of a foreign concept to some. But Weber Basin Water was established by the Bureau of Reclamation to manage the watershed of the Weber River and the Ogden River drainage basins. So here's a little map. If you're not familiar with the Utah area, there's a smaller Utah map down in the corner that kind of shows the geographical area that. So we manage water over this area. It's a 5-county area, primarily four main counties with just a sliver of Box Elder County, which is to our north. Willard Bay to our west, or excuse me, yes, Great Salt Lake and Willard Bay to the west, and then the metropolitan areas of Ogden, Layton, all the way down to Salt Lake County. So the population that we're dealing with is about 700,000 people in 5 counties. We work with 61 wholesale customers, which are cities, other water providers, other entities. We deal with agriculture water, drinking water, irrigation water, and then industrial type contracts for various industry. So of all that, the presentation today will focus on primarily the retail secondary water, which is untreated pressurized irrigation water at residential and commercial properties. We have 18,000 plus, and I put the plus there because that number is growing. With the population growth, we continue to add new connections every single year. So we're at 18,000 plus retail customers for secondary connections. Historically, those connections have not been metered. And I'll explain a little bit about how accountability has happened and how that's been set up. But overall, Weber Basin manages 8 large reservoirs in the Ogden and Weber River systems, and hundreds of miles of pipes, canals, pumps, diversions, and so forth. To date, well, I shouldn't say to date, but we have a meter project going now, and by the time that meter project finishes this April, we'll have about 8,000 of those connections metered. So to explain kind of the issues, and then I'll jump right back to the metering and how all this ties together. But we know Utah is a dry state. It's one of the driest in the nation. Drought years are very normal and expected. I should actually say wet years are the abnormal because we're mostly in dry years. Utah is also one of the fastest growing states. I think as of 2016, it was considered the fastest growing state, but all of the West is growing. And that's one of the major issues is with population growth, the changing of the water uses and needs. We're moving from a lot of agriculture to more urban and actually just residential drinking water and irrigation water. So approximately 60 to 65% of our municipal water deliveries, both secondary and treated drinking water, is used outdoors for the landscape. And so that's a big focus for us in terms of water conservation and water supply. And looking down the road, there's a lot of different regulations, both federal and state, environmental issues, cost of future projects, and the unavailability of future water projects is going to make water more of an issue, water supply more of an issue as we continue to go into different drought situations, potential climate change situations, and so forth. I threw this little population projection slide in there kind of to show, as a water district, our planning cycles are really about 50 years out. This one only goes to 2040, but we're looking at plans out to 2050 and even to 2060. And population plays a huge role of that. The projections anticipated, I think we're on course to add about 50,000 people a year in the state. And most of that growth will, of course, happen in the major metropolitan areas, which we're part of. And so it's a big concern. Population is growing rapidly. Water supply is not increasing at that same rate. So here's kind of a little scenario of our possible new water supplies. And notice conservation comes in there very first. We're viewing conservation as a water supply project. And with that, we also look at optimization, improving the efficiency of everything else we're doing. Lining canals, piping canals, doing different things. And development also plays a role when water is able to be developed. Of course, drilling wells, diversions off of different streams and so forth is difficult, expensive, and controversial. So, possible new water supplies, as I mentioned, conservation. There's a statewide conservation goal to reduce per capita water use 25% by the year 2025. And that's changing. They're coming up with more regional goals. But as a district, we support and have that goal, but we also intend to go beyond that goal. We're actually kind of looking at, the state has actually modified, it's not an official thing, but like a 35% reduction by the year 2030, 2035. A lot of that conservation has to happen in landscape water use. What's happening is conversion of existing agricultural water is turning to municipal needs. And then what's happening though is we're seeing an increase in the water use when there's actually less land being irrigated. And so we're targeting the landscape water use as a major area of conservation and efficiency. These other possible supplies, I already talked about groundwater, aquifer storage. The district's looking at and actually doing groundwater recharge projects. The Bear River project is something, if you're from Utah locally, that's a big project, controversial, that potential new water, but doesn't come without some consequences and some long drawn out projects or processes to be able to develop and use that water supply. So really quickly, our conservation programs and tools, we focus a lot on public education, using all forms of try to get the word out. We have a learning garden, and then secondary metering is highlighted there. It's become one of our primary and real focused programs for conservation and efficiency. And as I mentioned, let me finish this slide and then water efficient product rebates. We're doing smart controller rebates, low flow toilets. We're working with cities, our member agencies. But with secondary watering, why this is such an issue. So historically, I mentioned that irrigation water for these residential communities has not been metered. So how that came about is the Weber Basin project, a lot of that water was allotted. There was an allocation made based on parcel size for agriculture. And as agriculture has changed over to municipal, subdivisions, and just basically, housing developments, the water stayed with the land, but then was just divided up into each of those parceled segments. And typically that allocation was 3 acre-feet per acre. And so for agriculture, that meets the needs. But when you get a residential property with 3 acre-feet per acre on the raw parcel size, then you build a home on that parcel, driveways, hardscape sheds, structures, you still have the allocation of 3 acre-feet per acre, which was a lot of water, way more than is necessary to irrigate that parcel. But that's the allocation. And so people may not have been using more water than they're allocated, but it's way more water than is needed. So with metering, we can now start to target and educate and help people understand exactly how much water they're using. We now have accountability for that, how much water is being taken as well, and start to educate people about their behavior. So these are the primary reasons: end user accountability and then our supplier accountability. We're getting all kinds of, well, basically you could just say reporting at all levels is increasing. State level reporting, of course, we want to know, to manage a water supply, to be able to provide and develop, work on the infrastructure, make sure things are working as they should be. So we need to know where the water's going and who's driving the demand. But the users need to know. If we are expecting them to conserve and change behavior, well, then they've got to know how much water they're actually using. And just from some surveys and working with people a lot, what we would find, and even taking a lot of phone calls, is that most people think they're very conservative. They think they're doing their part, and it's someone else that's causing the problem. And as we've gone in and put a meter at these different locations, people that think their consumption is relatively low, they become very shocked at how much water they're actually consuming, and at sometimes even become very angry at how much water we're telling them they're using, because it's so high, they disbelieve it, and then they think the meter is wrong. So there's some interesting things that we're learning there. So we're finding that the education of the users is working. People are now becoming used to seeing our monthly reports. They're used to understanding that sprinkler systems have a large volume of water. They use a large volume of water, and so now they're starting to get used to that. And because we're giving them a target of an estimated need to shoot for, they're bringing down their water use. And I'll show you how we go about it, providing that information. So we're able to collect a lot of data: time of day watering, how much water they use per hour, some system demand type things, how much water is going through the system that can help us with capacity and pipe sizing. Sometimes we just have limited sizing anyway, and so knowing and helping people reduce at different times and so forth can maximize the efficiency and capacity of our system. We're also able to kind of group users into classes of highest users, or even by type, industrial, residential, and so forth. As we put everything into this metered system, we're able to really quantify everything better by group, by customer class, and so forth. So I've kind of already gone over this. We're educating users about their use, about their behavior, about their landscape and best management practices. We have an opportunity now, providing water use information, to also give them information about how to properly manage and work in a landscape. And so we use our horticulture staff and working with Utah State to make sure that we have the best and most accurate information for homeowners on their landscapes. So on this last slide, I mentioned the monthly report. So every month, any user, any metered customer that we have, with the exception of just a few commercial properties, are receiving this secondary water use report, or little statement. And I'll get into a little bit of detail of this, but instead of just a general conservation message, we can tailor some messages, give specific to users. We're doing more and more with this. But I'll get into some of the details of how this is working specifically. But we're working on trying to improve efficiency, reduce excess irrigation, help them meet a target. So I'll get back to that. I'll get back to this report with a little more detail and zoomed in there. But I want to just quickly throw out there the disadvantages to meter. Is there simply no disadvantages other than cost? We're learning a great deal about public perception and individual use. We're also trying to get a better grasp of how people really just perceive their landscape and what they're doing. So the cost is the big issue. On average, it costs us about $1,100 per connection. Most of that is labor costs because it's expensive to go back in after the fact, dig up all the service connection, put the meter in, and then put everything back together. And so labor costs are high. And of course, the meter costs are still there as well. But that's the biggest challenge we face is just the cost of doing this and the sheer number of connections. So just I mentioned our connection is about 18,000, but throughout Davis and Weber counties, which is in our main regional area, there are other secondary water providers. In total, we probably have about 100,000 plus secondary connections in our larger service area that need to be metered. So it's huge cost, it's a huge challenge, and something that's going to have to be addressed as we go forward. So lessons we're learning is GIS technology is playing a huge role. It's been really critical to us. It's making things very, very easy, very efficient. We're able to link things together spatially in a map, tying it with a database that has all the data for parcel information, for their meter information, for their water use information. I'll show you some of that. So we're also seeing that new and better meter technology is allowing for the secondary water to be metered. Historically, because of the quality of the water is raw water. It's essentially right out of the river, right out of canals and small storage reservoirs. And that water quality is not great. There's debris in it. There's seeds. There's small animals, crustaceans, so forth. And so as typical residential water meters wouldn't be acceptable. So the technology now is making it acceptable. We're finding some great products. I'll show you a couple of those that we're using that we've kind of settled on as we've tested several. We've used an AMR and an AMI system. We started out with an AMR. It's a drive-by system, which basically there's a radio connected to the meter. The radio is a data logger. It's storing data. And then essentially you drive through the service area, and an antenna with the truck talks to that radio and collects all that data. We started doing that, and then it started just to be very time consuming, and realizing the cost and the sheer scope of this, we moved over to an AMI system. So it's a network system where all that data is talking through some antennas and so forth. And now we're able to collect all that into a database. Essentially every 4 hours we get an update on water use information. So it's a little closer to real time. It's at least within the same day. We know what users are doing and can track a lot of different information that way. So we have tools. We've developed some internal tools with the internet and mobile devices, some customer portals to help users. All of this is still evolving. We're still relatively, I guess we're into this about 6 years, but some of what we're learning has actually been more recent with some of our tools, and some of the abilities we've had have just really come online more in the last 1 to 2 years. So let me explain a little bit about how we're giving users a target. So kind of going back just a little. So historically, it's unmetered water. We're now metering and trying to tell people and educate them how to be efficient or what they're doing. To do that, we use GIS mapping, and we basically, we're showing them what their parcel should need. So this is how we do that. Traditional parcel, as you can see on your screen, it would be highlighted in red. That would be the raw parcel. Their allotment would be based on that parcel size. It would show up on the county record, kind of property tax information is how they pay for that water through the taxes. There would be no bill, but they just have a volume of water, but they don't even know what that volume really means, or if they've ever exceeded it. So as we put a meter on, what we do is we take that same parcel and we digitize that parcel. And it requires some handwork. There's not an automated way to do this, but it required some of our staff to go in and actually draw in those polygons, or draw that in. So it's essentially just taking landscape area. Now, originally we started out with Utah State, and they came up with a very good higher level of sophistication program where it would actually even separate out plant material. But we found that that was a little too much for some of our users. So we simply just backed off of that and went straight just landscape area, and we made an assumption that that irrigated area is all just uniform turf. That kind of, it's not completely correct, but it gives them an allowance for the highest demand plant in the landscape, which is lawn. And so we based everything saying if they were watering everything and watering it for turf, they should have enough water for everything. And so we digitized the parcel, and then we're using the landscape area tied with evapotranspiration to determine a parcel estimated need. So the little black boxes on the presentation slides, in this case it's basically a 1/4 acre lot, 0.24 landscaped area times 3 acre-feet per acre. So their allocation would be 0.8 acre-feet. But the real parcel allocation is actually 1.1 if you include that area where the house and driveway sit. But we don't want to allow or continue to let people use 1.1 acre-feet because it's just way too much. It doesn't do anything, and that's where the conservation can be achieved. So their landscape allocation is 0.8 acre-feet, but when we throw evapotranspiration data into that and help them understand, here's what's driving the demand, and here's your parcel size, their actual estimated need was 0.7 acre-feet. So again, a little less and in driving conservation. So as you have questions about this, note them or put them in the chat, and we'll talk about those questions as we wrap up or at the end. So the biggest issue was the estimated need, and we kind of put that says who determines this, and we get calls about this all the time about the disputing. Well, how do you know how much I need? You don't know my yard, you don't know my soils, you don't know anything about this. So the estimated need is a very important item, but it is the most important item disputed by users. So again, on the report that I put on the slide here, we show their landscape area and then their water need based on that landscape area per month, and then a little percentage of where they are in their use compared to their need. At the little slider bar, and then on the left there, you can see the little chart by month of their use compared to their need. And it's interesting, and I'll show you some data here in just a second, some slides about where people fit. And in some months, people are great. They can fit under their estimated need, and other months, they're going far above. And then some, it's a challenge for them to hit that estimated need. That's where we're seeing people respond and bring their water use down. They're starting to realize, oh, I can make it. I can achieve this. At least some. We still have a percentage that don't believe anything and would continue to just water at 200 to 300 and sometimes even 400% of their estimated need. So I wanted to throw sorry, the formatting on these slides got a little bit off. I wanted to throw some maps in. We just refer to them as heat maps, but showing based on an allocation over the course of a 6-year period from 2012 through 18, basically, well, 7 years, of how some of this has changed, just mapping it with colors. So red indicates users that over that course that year were 100% of their allotted use. Yellow was 76 to 100%, green was 0 to 75%. And so I'm just going to kind of flip through these. I'll go fairly slow, but not too slow, but going from 2012 to 18, and you can kind of watch how the color changes, where it's a lot of, here, let me go back. 2012, lots of red in there, quite a bit of yellow. You see 2013, significant change, improvement, less red, less yellow, more green. 2014 continues to improve, 2015 continues to improve. And what I'm not showing here is that there is a correlation to weather. 2015 was actually a fairly wet summer. Some good summer precipitation and some things happening, and it's noticeable. Partly maybe the education we're giving and tracking of use, but people were responding to the weather patterns as much as they were the estimated need. Because in 2016, patterns shifted. It was a warm, dry year. 2017, a warm, dry summer. And 2018, even more red. And I've got some weather things to show here. Our last summer, we saw a significant rebound, but we also only had basically 1.7 inches of precipitation through the summer months, which was significantly lower compared to some of the other months, or those same months over those other years. So these are interesting, just some interesting little things that we watch and track. But as we normalize for weather, and I've got a different chart that shows that, we're still seeing improvements and reductions in use, even though many people are still exceeding their allocation, their estimated needs, and they're going that direction. So I'm sorry if I feel if I'm maybe a little scattered or something, but again, note your questions. We'll go back if we need. We'll fill in gaps if I've skipped over something. So the district, to track all this, it becomes very overwhelming. There is a lot of data. We're getting meter data in hourly increments, 24 hours a day. And so it begins to pile up. We needed a way to be able to manage the data, to be able to look and be able to provide user information if they were to call. And so we're fortunate we have a staff, like basically a programmer, computer programmer. He was working on some of the GIS stuff. He's a great programmer. He helped develop, Utah State started us on this course when we worked with them the first year, but then our own developer, our own staffs basically wrote a program to be able to manage and help us use the data effectively to convey information. Here's what kind of that one front screen looks like. On a typical user, we can see what they use each month of the year, and then below, well, for that current year, and then year-to-year comparisons in the chart below for each month over the course of the years. And then we can dive in even deeper to hourly information. So we're using Census as our primary meter. So we have a Census analytics type login where we can look. This is just one snapshot of one screen. And I wanted to show you this because this is a typical hourly thing. So if we could scroll through this, if we're on the web, we'd just scroll and you'd be able to pick up all the information each hour of that day. And you could look at every single day of the month or every single day of the irrigation season and be able to pick up and see exactly when water was flowing through that meter. In this case, this was actually October 1st of this year for this particular resident. And you can see, you know, where water started to come on at what looks like, well, it looks like that's where it actually ended. It's kind of going backwards here. But at 9 a.m. it ended. It was running at 8 a.m., running at 7. If we were to continue to scroll down, it was running for a period of several hours. And then users can see this as well. They can log into a user portal and they can see their hourly consumption and then make adjustments as needed. But this is what was shocking to most people, is realizing that in a 1 hour time period, they could be flowing anywhere from 1,000, 800 gallons an hour, 700 gallons an hour, up to our 1-inch pipe size and different things we've seen as high as 1,500 gallons an hour, but the average is down around 1,000 to 1,100 gallons an hour. It's pretty typical. Here's another way we can view hourly data in more of a spreadsheet type format, where in this particular case, this user watered every single day. And it's very obvious to pick this stuff out. They water starting at, it looks like 1 a.m. Well, no, sorry. It goes backwards from the right to the left in the hours. They started watering somewhere in the 8 p.m. hour and ended somewhere in the 1 a.m. hour. And there's the gallon totals that went through their meter, and you can see they watered the same irrigation cycle. They run it the same every single day. And these are the types of users, as we pick through and sort through some of this data, these are the type of users that we feel like would need education to realize you don't need to water every day. Something can change in your behavior. So let's shift a little bit into, I've got some charts here that will talk about water use and savings. And so this first chart from 2012 to 15, you notice a very dramatic decline. And so this is a group of the same people that we're tracking and watching over the years. So, starting out, we don't know what was actually happening before the meter went in. So, but 2012 is the first year the meter went in. They were really high at 48 inches, 48 inches of use. By 2015, that group has declined to 28 inches. So they're nearly cutting their use in half. But notice the weather, estimated need declined, and estimated need is based on evapotranspiration. So you can see weather patterns were shifting, but use was shifting. So we're kind of attributing people will follow weather, but with that extra educational information we were giving them, that first couple years, we feel like that kind of woke people up a little bit to what they're using. They were able to bring their use in line, and then now they're kind of following the general weather patterns, because you can see how it went back up in 16, 17, 18, but estimated need was also going up because of the temperature and lack of precipitation. But if you notice clear to 2018, even though it's higher, the gap between estimated need and actual water used is narrowing. So there's some good news, even though water use is still quite high. So here's the weather data that kind of correlates with that. The yellow line is the average maximum temperature. The The red line was total precipitation. And notice again, like I mentioned, in 2015, we had a significantly wetter year. And you can see that spike. And then down to 2018, that's the lowest precipitation we've had over the last 7 years. And so, you know, that definitely correlates and plays a role. But we're learning all this because of, I mean, we could track weather, we could do a lot of things, but the correlation between actual use, hourly consumption, and weather, we're starting to put all this together. We're putting it into spatial things with GIS. So we're having lots of information available as we go onto a mapping site, can click on that parcel, open up all of the water use information tied with all this other data. So here's all of our metered users and their water use. You know, if we do some statistical analysis here, this is basically kind of showing where everybody is in the inches above their estimated need. And so at 0, that's where they should be. If everyone was right at their estimated need, that line would be right at 0. But you can see in 2012, we're up above 17.15 inches above estimated need. And now down, as we move across, it doesn't look like dramatic changes, but in 2018, we're now at 5.17 inches above estimated needs. So there is significant progress, even though there's a long way to go. We're seeing some great conservation efforts simply by providing a meter, and I shouldn't say simply because there's a lot of work that goes into it, but providing a meter and then providing the usage information so those users can make better decisions about what they're doing in their landscapes. And then here, this chart shows just a comparison in evapotranspiration over that same period. So the different lines, different years, it's kind of a mess. The evapotranspiration value, the kind of, basically it's that estimated need would be at 0. And so this does tell us a little bit, though, in relation to water use, that early in the season, most people do pretty well. But in our climate here, that's typically a time when we do get good precipitation. April into May, sometimes then even into later May can be wet, can be cooler. And so we're kind of seeing that in the trends of the evapotranspiration information. And then as we get into June, it really starts going up. And then there's a rapid decline again in October. But we're starting to see this in usage data where people are pretty good in the spring, and then they really, really struggle towards the fall. Even though temperatures start declining in September, water use stays very high until water goes off in October. So there's a lot of education we can do about fall water use and dialing it back in the fall as temperatures and day length and so forth changes. So here's just a little picture of what kind of goes into secondary metering. This is a retrofit where you can see we hired this out. It's a contracted job. The guy's in there. You know, a lot of the services can be deep. They can range anywhere from 6 feet deep to 18 inches deep. And they're digging those up, redoing the service connection, putting a meter in, and tying it all back together. So this is not a small undertaking. As I mentioned, a lot of labor involved. Currently, our contractor is doing a lot of mostly hand digging. They do a great job. They're very fast, but it's very labor intensive because there's also a lot of other utilities in that park strip area where the meter needs to go. So, as I mentioned, secondary metering, we probably have the largest contiguous system in the United States of untreated pressurized irrigation directly to homes. As I mentioned, there's over 100,000 connections in Davis and Weber counties among all of the water purveyors, irrigation companies, and so forth. Technology is making this achievable, where we're going to be able to continue to meter. Technology is going to improve. Meters will get better. And as technology improves, costs usually go down. The challenge is labor costs don't always go down, but the product and technology costs, as things continue to get more mainstream, usually come down. So that'll probably help us out in the future. Our policy going forward is that all new connections have a meter installed by the developer. So that is saving retrofit costs down the road. Anytime a new connection, any new subdivision that goes in at this point, anywhere in our service connection, those developers have to provide that meter. They're installing it from day one, and that is saving us time and money down the road as those things come online. The challenge is because we're currently not billing any differently. People, as far as their secondary water goes, they're assessed for their allocation on their property taxes. And so there's not a billing or a price incentive to change anything at this point, but that is all going to change. In the future, we will have a billing element, and we're not quite sure how that's going to work. The allocation will have to go away. Their assessment on the property tax will have to go away. And then a billing system simply based on usage will have to be implemented. And that's quite an undertaking, given the history and the years of doing something a certain way. That's going to be a big education effort and quite a shock, I think, for most people to start paying for their secondary water based on consumption. So our next hurdle, of course, is cost, as I've just mentioned, and just continuing to work forward to meter all the connections that we've got in our system. So to date, we've tried several different meters and different brands of meters, and I won't go into the details of which ones don't work, but currently we're using a Census iPearl meter. It's the one shown on your screen to the right. That's our traditional residential meter. It comes in a 1 inch and a 3/4 size, which is what we've used for average residential connections, primarily 1 inch. As we move into larger connections, where we have more commercial properties or different types of, we've got situations where we have an HOA parcel and they've got a 4-inch connection going into a certain development. We'll use an Elster Evo Q4 meter. These meters work great. All of these, well, the Census, we're using a Census system, so the Census naturally connects and works super well for the talking and communication. The Elster Evo Q4 is compatible with the Census system, and we can put a Census radio on there. It connects into our AMI. We're able to gather data off of it just like we would on any other meter. Now, when we started, we were using an Itron radio instead of a Census SmartPoint radio. We were using Itron because it was compatible with all kinds of different meters. We actually started using an Elster meter to begin with. We still have some of those Itron radio units for our AMR system, and we still do drive by certain areas of our system that are not connected into our network yet. As we go through time, we'll be replacing those radios and bringing everything into the networked AMI system as we go. But the radio does store data for 40 days. We try to read those every single month. But as I mentioned, the numbers are declining on that, and that's making it more user-friendly for the customers that have those radios, because those that have those, they're not able to see their hourly data in a real-time fashion at this point. So as we move forward, we're asking our cities that we work with to help us. City ordinances requiring meters would be helpful. City ordinances that require various things in the landscape will help, various landscape ordinances. So we're trying to give some examples, help set an expectation and a tone for conservation among the general public. And I think it's a slow process. Anytime you try to change behavior on a large public scale, it requires some patience. It's not an overnight change by any means. I think people generally respond to crisis situations pretty well, but we're not in a crisis yet, but we're trying to slowly educate and help people understand their water issues, water supply issues, and then understand the conservation best management practices to have attractive landscapes while they're saving water. And that's something that I think a lot of people, they find it a little bit hard to believe. They think they can't save water and still have an attractive landscape. They kind of immediately think desert, barren, it's not going to be very attractive. And so that's part of our education as well, is helping people understand they can have green, lush landscapes. It can look very, very attractive, but we can really cut back on our water. And I didn't mention this, the kind of the percentage. Those numbers I showed in the previous charts, that does equate to about a 30% reduction among metered users from 2012 to date. And so that's significant. That's putting us on target with our conservation goals of a 30 to 35% reduction. And that's just metering. And we realize there's going to be greater, we're going to have to go beyond that as well. The education has to continue, more has to be done to continue this. But metering provides us a great tool and a great means to have accountability and to assist in that educational effort. So kind of in summary, we're saving a significant amount of water. The secondary systems, it's almost getting to a point now that some are debating whether secondary systems are even worth it. The costs, the infrastructure, essentially you have two systems of pipes in the ground. But for now, they continue to go in our service area. It's still cheaper than treating drinking water, but it's all the same water supply. And so that's our biggest concern. So with that, I don't know how much time we have, but I did want to leave some time for questions or different things that you would like to pose if there are any. So with that, I can't see those questions yet, but Adria, you can let me know.
Thanks, David. That was great. I don't show any questions yet in the Q&A. I don't see any in the chat. So if you do have some questions, please go ahead and put those in. We have about 15 minutes if you do have any questions for David to answer those. So thank you, David. I do have a quick question for you. Just kind of time frame, how long this whole process you're planning for it to take before the metering, before you start actually are done with the metering and start charging for those connections?
Yeah, that's a great question. We want to do this as fast as possible. To get where we've been already, we've applied for federal grants through the Water Smart program and different things. So the funding has come in. We've been awarded some of those grants, but right now, because of the cost, we're able to do about 1,100 to 1,200 meters a year. And that's, we're just over $1 million a year with that. And we want to accelerate that, but a lot of it's dependent upon funding. And so internally, the district is budgeting and trying to plan. But ideally, we want to get these metered as quickly as possible, because there is some debate about equity. Can we really start billing half of the users off of consumption while the other half have an allocation? There's some equity things there. So we do want to meter all of these as quickly as possible. But if we look at kind of the trend we're on, it'll probably be between 5 and 10 years out before it's all metered.
Okay. Did you get a lot of pushback from the city on ordinances or developers about having that built into new housing?
With developers, you kind of just make the policy. They have to provide water for the development, or they have to show that there's water for that development anyway. So that's part of the process that development goes through anyway, making sure there's water for that development and so forth. So that was actually an easy step, is just saying, going forward, this is what it's going to be. The cost to the developer is actually pretty minimal. They have to pay for the equipment, but they're already doing the infrastructure. So they were in just a few $100s to put in a meter, and they really don't need that cost. They pass that cost on. Ultimately, the users, the consumers, whoever buys those lots, they're going to be paying those extra few $100s. But it's a huge cost savings and time savings doing that up front. So that wasn't a problem. With cities are a little more difficult. Because of city councils and mayors' elected positions, there's not a huge motivation, or there's not a high drive to change landscape ordinances or to really, start shaking things up in a city. And so that's been a slower process. We're seeing some cities are becoming much more responsive. They're really kind of getting with us on this. Others are a little bit distant still. They're kind of like, we'll deal with this when we need to deal with this. And because secondary water isn't necessarily tied to their municipal water system, because they're two systems, some cities don't place as high a value on this because it's not their system. Even though they think it's important, but they're kind of like, that's your problem. You guys figure that out. We're dealing with our city problems. And so it's kind of helping them realize, no, this is everybody's challenge. This is, all of us are in this water. We're all here together with this water supply. We all need to be working on this. And so that's, again, kind of a slow process too.
Great. I don't see any questions coming up yet. You must have given such a thorough presentation that
Either that or else I
everything.
just didn't give any useful information at all. There's no questions.
So David's information is up there too on the screen if you do want to send him a question.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to take an email or a call and talk to individuals specifically about their own thing, or if there's something I skimmed over, maybe they want a little more detail. I'm happy to talk to you on the phone about specific things that I may not have covered or just didn't come up.
Okay, great. There is continuing education information in the chat box too, if you want to try any of those links there. Looks like we do have one question, a comment actually, very nicely done. I appreciate the detail. So you must have answered everything completely.
No, I hope.
But thank you all for joining us today. Our next webinar will be January 8th. So look for emails going around about that. And if you have any comments or questions, just let us know. But thanks everyone for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Adria.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
You.
You need me to stay on at all for a little bit to see, or is that we're good?
We're good.
Okay.
We're good, yeah. Thanks, David. We appreciate you giving us a presentation today.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks.